Winston S. Churchill, The World Crisis, Volume 2, Chapter 20, The Darkening Scene. May and June saw the beginning of the Great Russian Retreat. Up till the end of March, the strategy of Hindenburg and Ludendorff had aimed at the encirclement and capture of entire Russian armies. They had made their first cast towards Warsaw in November 1914, but the German and Austrian forces were not strong enough to sustain so ambitious a conception, and the attempt was skillfully frustrated by the Grand Duke. They tried a second cast in January, this time northward against the Russian armies in East Prussia. But although nearly 100,000 prisoners were captured in the fearful winter battle of the Masurian Lakes, the bulk of the Russian armies slipped away as the Germans closed round them, and no strategic result was attained. The plan was good, and this time the forces employed were adequate, but the season was badly chosen and the difficulties of a winter campaign underestimated. Footnote, quote, by General von François, a German authority. End of footnote. By the beginning of March 1915, the entire Eastern Front had again subsided into trench warfare, and on March 22, Przemysl fell to the Russian southern group of armies, setting free large Russian forces for the invasion of Hungary. The second Hindenburg-Ludendorff attempt to procure a supreme decision in the East had failed. But now a suggestion came from the Austrian chief of the staff, Konrad von Hötzendorf, to force the Russians out of the trenches by a breakthrough on a limited front. Hindenburg and Ludendorff, still intent upon repeating Tannenberg, opposed the Austrian plan and wished, in spite of their previous disappointments, to achieve strategic results by undertaking another enveloping operation from the north on an even larger scale. For this, the German main headquarters could find neither the men nor the munitions which were needed, and on April 4, Falkenhayn, who had succeeded Moltke as chief of the German General Staff, decided to adopt the Austrian conception and to attempt a breakthrough between Gorlice and Tarnow, as Konrad von Hötzendorf had proposed. Tarnow lies in Galicia, near Krakow, at the junction of the Biala and the Dunajec rivers, and Gorlice, just north of the Carpathians, is about 25 miles southeast of Tarnow. The sector of attack lay in the south side of the Russian salient in Galicia, so that a considerable portion of the Russian front lay to the west of the German line of advance, under the menace of being cut off should it succeed. The blow was an uppercut. The German-Austrian attack began on May 2. It had been entrusted to Mackensen. Aided by poison gas and a tremendous artillery, the attack was immediately successful, both the first and second Russian positions being captured. The strategic instinct of Konrad von Hötzendorf was also to be vindicated, for the Grand Duke Nicholas, rather than allow the troops on either side of the gap to be taken in flank, withdrew the whole line in this part of the front. This process of attack on a limited front was repeated continuously by the Germans during the months that followed, and each time it induced large withdrawals of the Russian line, culminating in the clearance of the whole of Galicia and Poland and the fall, one after another, of all the fortresses and towns on which the Russian armies had rested. As this somber development was recorded day after day during June and July on our maps, Lord Kitchener became increasingly anxious. He feared that Russia would collapse entirely, and that the Germans would then transfer immense forces from the eastern to the western front. He persuaded himself on more than one occasion that this transference was already in progress and that a hostile offensive in France was imminent. For reasons which have been abundantly explained, I could not share these apprehensions, and I endeavored to combat them on every occasion. I believed that the Russians would succeed in retaining very large Austro-German armies on their front for an indefinite period. I did not believe that the Germans had any intention of abandoning their drive against Russia or of going back and reopening an offensive in the West. Lastly, I pointed continuously to victory at the Dardanelles as the sole and supreme remedy open to us for the evils of our situation. While ministerial changes and cabinet discussions had been taking place at home, the situation at the Dardanelles and on the Gallipoli Peninsula had passed through several critical phases. On May 19, the Turks, having received news of the arrival of German submarines, made a most determined and serious effort to drive the Anzacs into the sea. The attack, in which 4 divisions comprising 30,000 Turkish infantry took part, was maintained for many hours, both in darkness and in daylight. It was completely and decisively repulsed at every point. When it ceased, the Turks had lost at least 5,000 men, and 3,000 of their dead lay in front of the Anzac trenches. The British loss, on the other hand, did not exceed 600. On the morrow, the Turkish commander asked for an armistice to bury the dead and collect the wounded, and this was conceded by Sir Ian Hamilton. After May 19, said the Turkish War Office, when the war was over, it was realized that the British defense at Anzac was too strong to enable us to effect anything against it without heavy artillery with plenty of ammunition. And since our own position was also very strong in defense, 2 weak divisions were left in the trenches and the other 2 were withdrawn. The position at Anzac was henceforward unchallenged. On June 4, a general attack was delivered by the British and French along the whole front at Helles. In this action, the 29th Division, the 42nd Division, the 2nd Naval Brigade, and both French divisions took part. The Allied forces numbered about 34,000 infantry and the Turks 25,000. Despite a woeful deficiency in artillery and ammunition, the British troops stormed the trenches of the Turkish centre. The French gained ground on the right, but were afterwards driven back by counterattacks. This exposed the flank of the Naval and 42nd Divisions, who were in succession compelled to yield up the greater part of their gains. In the end, the general line of the Allies was advanced by no more than 200 or 300 yards. The battle was costly for both sides. The Turkish losses amounted to 10,000, and those of the British alone to an equal number. As in all the battles on the peninsula, the issue hung in a trembling balance. The Turks were thrown into such confusion that on only 2 kilometers of their front no less than 25 battalions, or parts of battalions, were mingled in the line without any higher organization. In these straits, the Turkish divisional commander reported that no further British attack could be resisted. In a heated conference, the Turkish Chief of the Staff advised the withdrawal of the whole front to Akibaba. It was only with the greatest difficulty and by the enemy's good luck that the intermingled troops were relieved by a fresh Turkish division on the night of June 7. On June 21, another important action was fought by the French corps, which attacked with great spirit on the right of the Helles front, captured the Haricot redoubt, and made a substantial advance. A portion of these gains were wrested from them the next day by a Turkish counterattack. A week later, June 28, The British, being reinforced by the 52nd Division, made a general attack on the left of the Helles front. 5 lines of trenches were captured, and an advance of about 1,000 yards was secured. The Turkish force engaged comprised 38,000 infantry with 16 field and 7 heavy batteries. The fire of the ships was, on this occasion, found to be most effective, and the success of the attack again led to critical discussions at the Turkish headquarters. The German general Weber, now commanding the southern zone, wished to withdraw the whole front to the Killit Bar Plateau. Liman von Sanders, however, overruled him and demanded instead a speedy counterattack. For this purpose 2 fresh Turkish divisions were brought into the line, and a fierce surprise assault was delivered before dawn on July 5. The Turks were repulsed with a loss of 6,000 men. "The affair of the 28th," said General Caldwell in his cool and instructed account of the campaign, footnote, Major General Sir C. E. Caldwell, in the Dardanelles, page 160, end of footnote, following closely Gourad's stroke on the opposite flank, seemed to suggest that if there had been a plentiful reserve to throw into the scale at this juncture on the Helles front, this might have proved the psychological moment for initiating a determined effort to secure Krithia, the high ground beyond that coveted village, and even possibly Akibaba itself. No such reserves were, however, available. The paralysis of the British executive during the formation of the coalition government and the education of its new ministers had effectually withheld this boon. A third attack along the whole front was delivered with such ammunition and troops as could be found on July 12 to 13. The general line was advanced from 200 to 400 yards, but no important results were obtained. It had been evident from the beginning of July that considerable reinforcements were reaching the Turks. On the other hand, the British army was woefully reduced by wastage and casualties. Already by the middle of May, after the first battles, the infantry of Sir Ian Hamilton's 5 divisions were 23,000 men, or 40% below their war establishment. These deficiencies were never overtaken by the drafts supplied by the War Office. The 52nd Division and various minor reinforcements dribbled in during June, but did little more than keep pace with the wastage. While the new divisions were on the sea, the old divisions were dwindling. During the whole of May, June, and July, the total of the British forces on the peninsula and at Anzac never exceeded 60,000 men. Even more discouraging than depleted battalions was the scarcity of ammunition. During the month of June and July, said General Simpson Bakey, who commanded the British artillery, footnote, in the Gallipoli Diary, Appendix I, page 281, statement of Major General Simpson Bakey, end of footnote. The total number of rounds of 18-pounder ammunition at Cape Helles never reached 25,000. Before one of our attacks, it used to reach its maximum, which was about 19,000 to 23,000. The total amount of 18-pounder, therefore, was limited to about 12,000 rounds, as it was necessary to keep 6,000 to 10,000 rounds in reserve to guard against Turkish counterattacks. As there was no high explosive shell for the 18-pounder, except 640 rounds expended on June 4, only shrapnel could be used, and it is well known that shrapnel is but little use for destroying hostile trenches. On July 13, only 5,000 rounds for the field artillery remained at Helles, and all active operations had, perforce, to be suspended. The weight of field gun ammunition available to prepare and support the British assaults in any of these battles on the peninsula never exceeded 150 tons. For the purpose of judging the scale of the artillery preparation, this may be compared with over 1,300 tons fired in the first 2 days of the Battle of Loos at the end of September in the same year, and with upwards of 25,000 tons often fired in 2 days during the August offensive of 1918. The rifle and machine gun fire of the defense on each occasion remained a constant factor. Hard tasks were therefore set to the troops in Gallipoli, and the fact that the issue hung continually in the balance is the measure of their bravery and devotion. Footnote: the whole story of the artillery at Helles may be summed up in the following sentences. Insufficiency of guns of every nature. Insufficiency of ammunition of every nature, especially of high explosives. Insufficient provision made by the home authorities for spare guns, spare carriages, spare parts, adequate repairing workshops, or for a regular daily, weekly, or monthly supply of ammunition. Guns provided often of an obsolete pattern and so badly worn by previous use as to be most inaccurate. Lack of aeroplanes, trained observers, and of all the requisites for air observation. Total failure to produce the trench mortars and bombs to which the closeness of the opposing lines at Helles would have lent themselves well. In short, total lack of organization at home to provide even the most rudimentary and indispensable artillery requisites for daily consumption. Not to speak of downright carelessness, which resulted in wrong shells being sent to the wrong guns, and new types of fuses being sent without fuse keys, and new types of howitzer shells without range tables. These serious faults provoked their own penalties in the shape of the heavy losses suffered by our infantry and artillery, which might have been to a great measure averted if sufficient forethought and attention had been devoted to the sideshow at the Dardanelles. End of footnote. The fact that during all this period the British fleet neither attacked nor threatened the forts at the Narrows, nor attempted to sweep the minefields, enabled the German and Turkish commanders to draw upon the medium and mobile artillery which defended the straits for the purpose of succoring the 5th Turkish Army in its desperate struggle. The first transference began on April 27. On May 23, Admiral von Usedom, who on April 26 had assumed command of the fortress of the Dardanelles and of all the marine defenses of the straits, reported to the Emperor that he had up to that date, under protest, already yielded to the army the following artillery: 6 8.2-inch mortars, 8 6-inch field howitzers, 2 4.7-inch quick-firing field howitzers, 9 4.7-inch field howitzers, 12 4.7-inch siege guns, and 12 field guns, in all 49 pieces. These transferences took place gradually during this month. During June and July, the 5th Turkish Army, in its distress, made ever-increasing inroads upon the artillery defense of the straits. Writing to the Emperor on July 20, Admiral von Usedom again revealed his anxiety at the denudation of the marine artillery. The struggle of the Fifth Army against the forces landed by the enemy entails great sacrifices and has so far resulted in no advantage to the defense. In my judgment, there is no prospect of driving the enemy into the sea. In fact, I believe it is only possible merely to hold him to the ground which he has already won if large supplies of ammunition and reinforcements of men are provided. As I mentioned in my telegram, the Minister of War has decided, against my advice, that the army should be handed over all the fortress guns and munitions which it demands. A systematic preparation of second-line defenses in case the army should not be able to hold its ground was set aside as out of the question. What the fortress has already provided in munitions and guns, the attached list shows. Footnote. This list shows that from the beginning of the fighting in Gallipoli to July 20, the following howitzers, guns, and ammunition had been diverted from the Dardanelles defenses to the 5th Turkish Army. 14 8.2-inch howitzers, mortars, with 548 rounds. 8 6-inch field howitzers, pattern 93, with 2,118 rounds. 3 6-inch QF howitzers, with 2,024 rounds. 2 4.7 QF howitzers with about 260 rounds. 6 4.7 field howitzers with 1,178 rounds. Besides these 33 howitzers, which were a vital factor in the defenses of the Narrows, 50 smaller guns and 12,000 shells were collected from the German and Turkish warships, from Constantinople, and from the fortress transferred to the army. End of footnote. I forward also, with all respect, a copy of my appreciation of the situation addressed to the Minister of War, and of the orders issued by me. Your Imperial and Royal Majesty will see from this that it was my endeavor to maintain the system of fortifications of the Straits at such a strength that it would again be self-sufficient in case of any weakening of resistance on land. Since the verdict has gone against my view, I have ceded batteries to the army, thus weakening the naval defenses. The aircraft have also been removed from the sea defenses, but in this case there is a partial substitute in the recently arrived German naval hydroplanes. And again, how long the Fifth Army can hold the enemy is more than I can prophesy. If no ammunition comes through from Germany, it can only be a question of a short time. This is shown by the numerous proposals for support and relief, together with the study of their establishments and their casualties. The fortress system itself has suffered from the transfers which I have reported, and for it also the speedy arrival of German ammunition is a matter of life and death. The opinion of Turkish General Headquarters appears to me to incline to a hazardous optimism. It is certainly not clearly realized there what is involved for the supreme command of the Central Powers here in the Dardanelles if the means of war at present available are found to be insufficient. Everything must be done by Turkey, even at risk of sacrifice to herself, to get German ammunition through the Balkan countries and by that means stabilize the battle. These efforts met with no success, and on August 16, Admiral von Usedom reported to the Emperor that the attempts of bringing ammunition ordered in Germany through Romania have all failed. He was therefore forced to endure his precarious situation month after month. It must, however, be observed that, whereas the Turkish shortage of ammunition arose from causes beyond their control, the British shortage sprang solely from lack of decision in the distribution of the available quantities between the various theaters of war. The measures taken to cope with the German submarine attack upon our communications followed in the main the lines which have been indicated and proved, broadly speaking, completely successful. The fleet was kept in the shelter of Mudros harbor. Battleships were only exposed when required for some definite operation, and the ordinary support of the army by fire from the sea was afforded during June by destroyers and light vessels. This was found to be sufficient. The observation and direction of the ship's fire attained every week a higher efficiency. This process continued steadily until naval cooperation in land fighting on Gallipoli had become a factor of the utmost value. In July, the monitors and bulged cruisers began to arrive. Thenceforward, the fire of the Turkish guns from Asia was controlled and largely quelled. The 4 large monitors armed with 14-inch guns, 4 medium monitors armed with 9.2-inch or 6-inch guns, and 4 bulged cruisers, Theseus, Endymion, Grafton, and Edgar, were all on the scene by the end of that month. Had action been taken when it was first proposed to Lord Fisher, the arrival of these vessels would have been antedated by more than 3 weeks. But the interval was passed without serious disadvantage to the army, and when the whole Monitor fleet had arrived, the naval support of the troops was not only fully restored, but much enhanced. Meanwhile, the supply of the army was maintained by the use of large numbers of small, shallow-draft vessels and proceeded uninterruptedly, so that the middle of July reserves of 24 days' rations had been accumulated for all troops ashore at Helles and Anzac. The reinforcements sent from home were conveyed to their destination, although several transports were torpedoed, and in one case 1,000 lives were lost. It is remarkable that neither monitors, bulged cruisers, nor shallow-draught vessels were ever seriously attacked or threatened by submarines. Lastly, the great netted areas proved an effective deterrent against submarine attack. Although warships of every kind were continually moving about within them, they were in no case molested during the whole of the campaign. Thus, what had seemed to be a danger potentially mortal was entirely warded off by suitable measures perseveringly applied on a sufficient scale. While the submarine attack upon the British sea communications was being frustrated, a far more effective pressure was being brought to bear upon the enemy. In December 1914, Lieutenant Commander Norman Holbrook had gained the Victoria Cross by diving his submarine B-11 under the minefields of the Dardanelles and sinking the Turkish cruiser Mesudie. On April 17, this desperate enterprise had been again attempted by submarine E-15, in conjunction with Sir Ian Hamilton's impending landing. The effort failed. The vessel ran aground in the straits near Dardanos. Her captain, Lieutenant Commander T.S. Brodie, was killed. Most of her crew were captured, and her carcass, after being fiercely contended for, was finally shattered by a torpedo from a British picket boat. On April 15, while the landing was in progress, the Australian submarine AE-2, undeterred by the fate of her forerunner, most gallantly and skillfully dived through and under the minefields and succeeded in entering the Sea of Marmora. Here, from the 25th to the 30th, she attacked the Turkish shipping and sank a large gunboat. On April 30, however, being damaged and unable to dive properly, she was herself sunk after a 2 hours fight by a Turkish torpedo boat, but the way had been reopened. The passage, whatever its perils, was shown to be still not impossible. The losses of these 2 boats, which so greatly disturbed Lord Fisher, did not prevent a sublime perseverance. On April 27, E-14 under Lieutenant Commander C. Boyle dived at 95 feet through the minefield, passed Kilid Bar at 22 feet under the fire of all the forts and torpedoed a Turkish gunboat near Gallipoli. From this time forward till the end, 1 or more British submarines continuously operated in the Sea of Marmora, and their attacks upon the Turkish water communications, almost by themselves, achieved the ruin of the enemy. E-14 remained in the Sea of Marmora from April 27 to May 18, continually hunted by torpedo boats and other patrol craft, and fired on so constantly that she could scarcely find breathing space to recharge her batteries and keep herself alive. Nevertheless, she wrought decisive havoc on the Turkish transports. On the 29th she attacked 2 and sank 1. On May 1 she sank a gunboat. On May 5 she attacked another transport and drove others back to Constantinople. On the 10th she attacked 2 transports convoyed by 2 Turkish destroyers and fired at both. The second transport was a very large vessel, full of troops. A terrific explosion followed the impact of the torpedo, and the transport sank rapidly. An entire infantry brigade and several batteries of artillery, in all upwards of 6,000 Turkish soldiers, were drowned. This awful event practically arrested the movement of Turkish troops by sea. E-14 had now no torpedoes, and on May 17 she received wireless orders to return. On the 18th she again ran the gauntlet of the forts at 22 feet, and dived, as she thought, under the minefields. She must, however, have passed right through the lines of mines in extreme danger. Commander Nesmith in E-11 entered the Marmara on the following day. His vessel was newly equipped with a 6-pounder gun and cruised for some days lashed alongside a sailing vessel, sinking a gunboat and several ships. On May 25, Commander Nesmith dived E-11 literally into Constantinople and hit with a torpedo a large vessel alongside the arsenal. E-11 grounded several times and escaped with great difficulty from the enemy's harbor. She now established a reign of terror in the Marmara, attacking unsuccessfully the battleship Barbarossa, fighting with destroyers, sinking storeships and steamers, with continued hairbreadth escapes from destruction. On June 7 she returned through the minefield, actually fouling a mine which she carried on her port hydroplane for a considerable distance while under heavy fire from the forts. She had been in the Marmara for 19 days, and had sunk 1 gunboat, 3 transports, 1 ammunition ship, and 3 storeships. On June 10, Commander Boyle made his second entry into the Marmara, where he remained for 23 days, sinking 1 large steamer and 13 sailing vessels. E-12, Lieutenant Commander Bruce, and E-7, Lieutenant Commander Cochrane, passed the straits on the 20th and 30th June respectively, destroyed between them 7 steamers and 19 sailing vessels, and fired repeatedly on the roads and railways along the coast. A new peril was now to be added to the passage. In the middle of July the Turks completed the Nagara anti-submarine net. This net was made in 10-foot meshes of 3-inch, strengthened with 5-inch wire, and, except for a small gateway, completely closed the passage to a depth of over 220 feet. This barrier was guarded by 5 motor gunboats armed with depth charges, and by numerous guns specially placed. On July 21, Commander Boyle, for the 3rd time, made the passage of the straits in E-14. A mine scraped past her near the Narrows without exploding, and by good luck she passed through the gate of the net at Nagara. On July 22 she met E-7 in the Marmara, and both vessels together continued their depredations upon shipping. All hospital ships were spared, although their increase in numbers showed that they were being used for military transport. Commander Boyle's final return on August 12, that is, his 6th passage of the minefield, was thus described by him. "I missed the gate and hit the net. It is possible the net now extends nearly the whole way across. I was brought up from 80 feet to 45 feet in 3 seconds, but luckily only thrown 15 degrees off my course. There was a tremendous noise, scraping, banging, tearing, and rumbling, and it sounded as if there were 2 distinct obstructions, as the noise nearly ceased and then came on again, and we were appreciably checked twice. It took about 20 seconds to get through. I was fired at on rounding Kilid Bar, and a torpedo was fired at me from Chanak, breaking surface a few yards astern of me. A mile southwest of Chanak, I scraped past a mine. But it did not check me. After I got out, I found some twin electric wire round my propellers, and various parts of the boat were scraped and scored by wire. On August 5, E-11, Commander Nesmith had made her second passage of the Straits. A mine bumped heavily along her side of Kefes Point at a depth of 70 feet. To break the net at Nagara, she dived to 110 feet and then charged. The net caught her bow, and she was drawn violently upwards. Under the strain, the wires of the net snapped with a crack, and the submarine was freed. An hour later, she torpedoed a transport. All day she was harassed by patrol craft. At dawn the next morning she was attacked by the bombs of an aeroplane. Later in the day she torpedoed a gunboat. On the 7th she was in action with troops on the roads along the coast. On the 8th she torpedoed and sank the battleship Barbarossa, which, escorted by 2 destroyers, was hurrying to the peninsula during the Battle of Suvla Bay. These adventures and exploits continued without cessation during 29 days, at the end of which E-11 returned safely, having sunk or destroyed 1 battleship, 1 gunboat, 6 transports, 1 steamer, and 23 sailing vessels. The perilous duty was taken up successively by E-2, E-7, E-12, H-1, Lieutenant Peary, and E-20, Lieutenant Commander Clifford Warren, as well as by the French submarine Turquoise. In all, the passage of Nagara was made 27 times. Every one of these voyages is an epic in itself. Out of 13 British and French submarines which made or attempted the passage into the Marmara, 8 perished, 4 with all or nearly all hands. Besides E-15 and AE-11, whose fates have been described, Cochrane's E-7 was caught in the Nagara net on September 4. Bombed with depth charges for 16 hours and having tried to fall through the bottom of the net by sinking to the excessive depth of 40 fathoms. Cochrane at last rose to the surface and, finding himself inextricably enmeshed, ordered his crew to jump overboard and sank his vessel with his own hands. His subsequent escapes from the Turks and adventures in captivity are an amazing tale of courage and pertinacity. Of the French submarines, 3 were destroyed or captured at the entrance or in the net. Sapphire in January, Jewel in May, and Marriott on July 26. The Turquoise was the only French submarine which achieved the passage, and she was disabled and captured after a brief career in the Marmara on October 30. In the captain's cabin of the Turquoise the enemy found his notebook, which he had forgotten to destroy. This notebook contained the rendezvous at which the Turquoise was to meet the British submarine E-20 on November 6. The German submarine U-14 was repairing at Constantinople. She kept the rendezvous, and E-20, expecting a friend, was blown to pieces by the torpedo of a foe. Footnote: U-Boote gegen V-Boote bei Leutnant zur See von Heimburg in Die Woche, March 10, 1917. End of footnote. In all, the British submarines destroyed in the Marmara 1 battleship, 1 destroyer, 5 gunboats, 11 transports, 44 steamers, and 148 sailing vessels. The effect of the virtual stoppage of the Turkish sea communication was most serious to the enemy, and towards the end of June the Turkish army was reduced to the narrowest margin of food and ammunition. It was only by great exertions and in the nick of time that the land route was organized sufficiently to bear the strain. Henceforward the whole supply of the peninsula was dependent upon 100 miles of bullock transport over a single road, itself vulnerable from the sea. The naval history of Britain contains no page more wonderful than that which records the prowess of her submarines at the Dardanelles. Their exploits constitute in daring, in skill, in endurance, in risk, the finest examples of submarine action in the whole of the Great War, and were, moreover, marked by a strict observance of the recognized rules of warfare. When one thinks of these officers and men, penned together amid the intricate machinery which crammed their steel, cigar-shaped vessels, groping, butting, charging far below the surface at unmeasured, unknown obstructions, surrounded by explosive engines, any one of which might destroy them at a touch, the target of guns and torpedoes, if they rose for an instant to the light of day, harried by depth charges, hunted by gunboats and destroyers, stalked by the German U-boat, expecting every moment to be shattered, stifled, or hopelessly starved at the bottom of the sea, and yet in spite of all, enduring cheerfully such ordeals for weeks at a time, returning unflinchingly again and again through the jaws of death. It is bitter indeed to remember that their prowess and devotion were uncrowned by victory. In the middle of July, I prepared and printed the following general appreciation and ventured upon a forecast of the action of Germany and Bulgaria, which, alas, proved only too true. After paragraphs reciting events with which the reader is already familiar, this memorandum proceeded. Until the decision of June 8 had been satisfactorily taken and ratified by the Cabinet on June 9, I did not dare to raise the question of further reinforcements, though they were obviously necessary. But on June 12 I wrote to the Secretary of State urging that the 2 first-line territorial divisions, which still remained in England, should be sent to the eastern Mediterranean. After repeated discussions at the Cabinet and at the War Councils, this was eventually settled on July 6, and Sir Ian Hamilton was definitely informed. It is now perfectly obvious that both these divisions will be required, but the Cabinet, in assenting to the dispatch of the second of the 2, stipulated that it should be kept at Alexandria, and, as I understand it, the Commander-in-Chief has not yet been given full liberty to use this division as he may think best. While this long delay in the dispatch of troops available all the time has been taking place, the enemy has not been idle, and the situation has been continually modifying itself to our disadvantage. The Turks have been able to bring up in succession one division after another from different parts of their empire, and to raise new levies of men. Although this process has been powerfully counteracted by the vigorous action of our army, continually harassing and wearing out the enemy, he has now been able to bring up reserves of a strength we cannot accurately measure, which would not have been available a month ago. There was no military reason why the original attack of April 25 should not have been delivered before the end of March, with all the troops that were employed on the latter date and the addition of several other divisions sent subsequent to that date. In this case, a complete victory might have been won. Secondly, there was no military reason that the attack, which is now impending, should not have been delivered at the end of June or the beginning of July. The only reason for the delay is that the governing instrument here has been unable to make up its mind except by very lengthy processes of argument and exhaustion, and that the divisions of opinion to be overcome and the number of persons of consequence to be convinced caused delays and compromises. We have always sent 2/3 of what was necessary a month too late. We are now on the eve of a most critical battle in the Gallipoli Peninsula. If we are successful, results of the greatest magnitude will follow, and the fall of Constantinople will dominate the whole character of the Great War and throw all other events into the shade. If we fail to obtain a decision and only make some progress, but not enough, then some of the gravest and most painful problems will arise. The precious time that has been lost can never be retrieved. The German is drawing nearer from the north. The windy weather is coming on. Romania may succumb to German pressure and release munitions to Turkey. Serbia may be smitten down and pierced, and Bulgaria, now almost within our reach, may realize that her aspirations can only be satisfied at German hands. Although we have all along had resources available which would have placed the issue of this battle beyond doubt, it can now only be regarded as one of the great hazards of war. The chances are not unfavorable, but where we might have had a certainty, we now have a hazard. We are leaving to the exertions of the British troops a problem which a few clear decisions of the government, taken even since the formation of the coalition, could have rendered infinitely less hard and costly. After reviewing the misfortunes which had attended our undecided diplomacy in the Balkans, due largely to the interplay of the hesitations of two and latterly three other great powers, the memorandum continued. Opportunity after opportunity, military and diplomatic, has been lost in the southeast of Europe. Risks have been run in the name of prudence before which hardihood itself would pale. Yet so good are the cards, moral, military, and political, that we hold and have held through the war in this theatre, if only we choose to play them, that one great opportunity still remains. It is the last. Time is very short, but we still have time and power to retrieve all previous mistakes. First, we ought now, without delay, to make all preparations to send the Third Army to Turkey as soon as possible. Footnote: the Third New Army of 6 divisions. End of footnote. All transport arrangements ought to be made for that purpose, preparations being begun now. If the battle goes in our favor, we need not send them. Whether these troops, if sent, should be used on the Gallipoli Peninsula, on the Asiatic side, or in Thrace, is a purely military question, which cannot and need not be settled until the result of the next battle is seen. We should then have at least 18 divisions available for the capture of Constantinople. Second, we must get Bulgaria now. Bulgaria is strong, her army is ready, her people are wounded by the Russian defeats, her territorial claims are rightful and harmonize perfectly with the principle of nationality, which ought to guide us. The oppression of the Bulgarian districts of Macedonia by the Serbians is in itself a great wrong. The taking of Kavala from Bulgaria by Greece after the Second Balkan War was, as was recognized at the time, a most impolitic act. There is nothing in Bulgarian claims, as now put forward, which is not reasonable and honorable. I proceeded to discuss the reactions which such a policy would produce in Serbia and in Greece, but this is scarcely suitable for publication. The memorandum concluded: the accession of Bulgaria would, of course, carry with it that of Romania, and the union of all the Christian states of the Balkans against their natural enemies, Turkey and Austria, will be complete. In order to gain this supreme advantage, the risk must be run that, having offered everything to Bulgaria, she will not move. In this case, as we are frequently warned, we shall have offended Serbia and Greece without gaining any compensating advantage. But after all, we have offended them already by the offers made. Once those offers are definitely rejected by Bulgaria, the substantive cause of offense dies, and if other circumstances did not intervene, we could, after an interval, address ourselves again to Greece. But other circumstances will intervene in the Balkans unless we can gain Bulgaria to our cause or attack Constantinople before the end of September without her, and these other circumstances may be fatal to the issue of the war and disastrous in a peculiar degree to Great Britain. To appreciate these circumstances, it is necessary to look at the main military situation from the German point of view. I do not believe in the immediate resumption of a great German offensive in the West. As stated by me in writing on February 25, in reply to alarmist reports, and again in my memoranda circulated to the Cabinet on June 1 and 18, there is no likelihood of the Germans being able to transfer from the Eastern to the Western theater during the next 2 months from 500,000 to 1 million men for an offensive in the West, and even if they did so, it is the thing we ought to welcome most. During the last few weeks we have had repeated statements that a great offensive is going to begin in the Western theater, and as on 3 or 4 previous occasions, when the same wrong arguments have been used with the same potent effect, nothing has followed. The Germans habitually spread false reports, and we are habitually deceived by them. As far back as February, the 29th Division was stopped sailing for 3 weeks for fear of a renewed German offensive in the West following on a Russian collapse. In the present case, the announcement made in all the German newspapers that the foreign attachés had left for the Western Front was a blind of the most obvious kind. It is undoubtedly in the Germans' power, by the calculated indiscretions of officers and agents, to color and confuse the whole of the intelligence information we receive through many sources. In these circumstances, it is the safest guide to consider what is the enemy's true interest. It is clear that his first interest is to press his advantage against Russia to the full to some point where the military situation of that country is definitely and fundamentally altered. How far he means to go against Russia we cannot measure, but that he should relax his pressure upon her in time to enable him to bring back his troops and begin a great offensive in the West within the next 2 months is impossible, and even in the next 3 months almost impossible. It is probable that he will not have done what he intends to do to Russia for at least 2 months. Footnote: although I believed these periods would be much longer, I did not attempt to forecast beyond the 3 months which were under discussion. End of footnote. And if fortune turns in favor of the Russians, he may be entangled there for a much longer period. But on the assumption that in 6 weeks or 2 months from now 20 or 30 divisions of German troops can be withdrawn from the Russian front, where would Germany be wise to send them? She might send them to Holland in case that country should turn against her later at an unfavorable moment. She might send them to Italy, where there are rich provinces to be conquered and to be held as security for a satisfactory peace. But far more attractive to her and dangerous to us than all of these, she might break through Serbia and seduce Bulgaria, establish a through route to Constantinople, gain full control of the Turkish Empire with power to organize it for war on the Prussian model, and open to herself avenues to Persia and India. We must not suppose that Germany, encouraged by victory, will stop short on the path of conquest, or that the Napoleonic dreams of Eastern domination, as an offset to England's colonial gains, have no place in the minds of her military leaders. In these regions, immense and easy prizes await the sword of the conqueror, and comparatively small armies could achieve the reduction of enormous territories. It is noteworthy in this connection that in spite of all pressure of this war upon Germany, the construction of the Baghdad Railway has been hurried forward with German material at the greatest speed. The one thing it would not pay the Germans to do is to break themselves in sterile efforts to pierce the lines in France. Here they would encounter very numerous, well-disciplined and well-supplied armies, far stronger proportionately than those they fought at the outset of the war, and here they have already packed out for themselves a very large conquered area comprising the whole of Belgium and Antwerp and some of the best departments of France. It is not their game to stand on what they have won and leave us, if we are foolish enough, to break our strength in trying to turn them out, while they gain further territories easily elsewhere. These conclusions were soon to be sustained by the march of events. At the end of the first week in July, Lord Kitchener resolved to add the 53rd and 54th Territorial Divisions to the reinforcements that were going to the Dardanelles, and I took occasion to write a letter to Sir Ian Hamilton, more encouraging in tone than my cabinet memoranda. Mr. Churchill to Sir Ian Hamilton. I rejoice to say that on Monday, after 3 weeks' work, the War Council definitely decided to add 2 territorial divisions to your army, making in all 6 divisions not yet engaged. I rejoice also at the punishment you are inflicting on the Turks, at the evident distress of their army and their capital, and at the progress made in gaining ground. My confidence in the future and in the wisdom of the policy which has launched this operation remains unshaken. Well done, and with good luck, or mistakenly done and with bad luck, if done in the end, it will repay all losses and cover all miscalculations in the priceless advantages it will win for the Allied cause. It has been a remarkable experience to me watching opinion slowly and steadily consolidating behind this enterprise, and to see the successive waves of opposition surmounted one after another. Ignorance, pessimism in high places, the malice of newspapers, the natural jealousies and carping of the Flanders army and of the French soldiers, have all failed to prevent the necessary reinforcements by land and sea from being sent. And now that you are equipped with all that you have asked for and more, the next great effort can be made. I never look beyond a battle. It is a culminating event, and like a brick wall bars all further vision. But the chances seem favorable, and the reward of success will be astonishing. Your daring spirit and the high qualities of your nature will enable you to enjoy trials and tests under which the freshly average of commonplace commanders would quail. The superb conduct and achievements of the soldiers would redeem even a final failure, but with a final success they will become a military episode not inferior in glory to any that the history of war records. Then there will be proud honor for all who have never flinched and never wavered. God go with you. I did not understand how far the actual performances of the War Office were to lag behind their paper programs. The actual facts were far less satisfactory than I knew. There is no principle of war better established than that everything should be massed for the battle. The lessons of military history, the practice of great commanders, the doctrines of the textbooks, have in every age enjoined this rule. We see Napoleon before his battles grasping for every man he can reach, neglecting no resource however small, cheerfully accepting risks at other points, content with nothing less than the absolute maximum which human power can command. This high prudence cannot be discerned in Lord Kitchener's preparations at this time. he did not decide to add the 53rd and 54th Division to the reinforcements that were going to the Dardanelles until it was impossible for the second of them to arrive before the battle had begun, thus having to go direct into action from a 3 weeks' voyage. The position of the troops in Egypt continued until the last moment undetermined. Including in the Dardanelles details, nearly 75,000 men were accumulated in Alexandria, Cairo, and along the canal. As long as we were threatening Constantinople, there could be no danger of a serious Turkish invasion of Egypt. It should have been possible to organize from General Maxwell's troops at least 30,000 additional rifles as a reserve, which could be thrown into the Gallipoli operations at the decisive moment and for a limited period. If General Maxwell had been ordered to organize such a force, and if Sir Ian Hamilton had been told that he could count it among the troops available for the battle, it would have been woven into the plans which were being prepared and would have sensibly improved the prospects. Lord Kitchener's treatment of the question was, however, most baffling. His telegraphic correspondence with Sir Ian Hamilton, which has been published, shows him at one moment counting large numbers of troops in Egypt as available, if necessary, for the Dardanelles, and at another chiding Sir Ian for attempting to draw on them. In consequence, the British garrison of Egypt played no part in Sir Ian Hamilton's calculations and plans, and was only thrown in, like so much else, too late. When, on the eve of the battle, July 29, Lord Kitchener telegraphed to Sir Ian Hamilton, informing him that he had a total of about 205,000 men for the forthcoming operation, the general replied, "The grand total you mention does not take into account non-effectives or casualties. It includes reinforcements such as the 54th and part of the 53rd Divisions, etc., which cannot be here in time for my operation, and it also includes yeomanry and Indian troops which, until this morning, I was unaware were at my unreserved disposal. For the coming operation, the number of rifles available is about half the figure you quote, that is, 120,000. This figure was not effectively disputed by the War Office. Lord Kitchener had specifically included in his total of 205,000, 8,500 yeomanry and 11,500 Indian troops and artillery stationed in Egypt. But when Sir Ian Hamilton attempted to draw on these, Lord Kitchener telegraphed, "Maxwell wires that you are taking 300 officers and 5,000 men of his mounted troops. I do not quite understand why you require Egyptian garrison troops while you have the 53rd Division at Alexandria, and the 54th, the last 6 battalions of which are arriving in 5 or 6 days, on the Aquitania. When I placed the Egyptian garrison at your disposal to reinforce at the Dardanelles, in case of necessity, Maxwell pointed out that Egypt would be left very short, and I replied that you would only require them in case of emergency for a short time, and that the risk must be run. I did not contemplate, however, that you would take troops from the Egyptian garrison until those sent specially for you were exhausted. How long will you require Maxwell's troops, and where do you intend to send them? They should only be removed from Egypt for actual operations and for the shortest possible time." I was not able to discover the shortage of drafts, nor was I aware of the ambiguous conditions under which the garrison of Egypt was available as a reserve. But a young staff officer from the Dardanelles, who reached London in July, disclosed to me the shortage of ammunition and suggested that consignments sent by rail to Marseille instead of by sea might still reach the army in time for the battle. I therefore urged Lord Kitchener to send the whole of the latest weekly outputs by this route. Usually most kind and patient with my importunity, he took this request very much amiss. I declared I would demand a cabinet decision, and we parted abruptly. I spent the afternoon and evening marshalling opinion, and informed the Prime Minister of my intention to raise the issue. However, when the decks were cleared for action, and I was invited to state my case, Lord Kitchener ended the matter by stating that he had now found it possible to issue the necessary orders. 3 trainloads of high-explosive shell went accordingly. Upon such preludes, the event was now to supervene.